Turn your Bibles, if you would, to 2 Timothy chapter 4. "52 years ago, this very day, I was given one job. I was supposed to go to the ice plant, get a 50-pound block of ice, and take it to Roseville Baptist Church and put it in the water cooler so that my wife could have her wedding and be a little cooler. Y'all remember those water cooler days with the water would be dripping off the ceilings and off the doors and off your head. But 52 years ago, this very day, Jan and I became a couple, and we love you. All right. Those aren't the cheap kind. Turn in your Bibles to 2 Timothy 4. "I charge you therefore before the God and the Lord Jesus Christ, who will judge the living and the dead at his appearing in his kingdom. Preach the word. Be ready in season and out of season. Convince, rebuke, exhort with all long-suffering and teaching. For the time will come when they will not endure sound doctrine, but according to their own desires." And that is the key to the second group that he talks to, according to their own desires. "Because they have itching ears, they will heap for themselves teachers, and they will turn their ears away from the truth and be turned aside to fables. But you be watchful in all things, endure afflictions, do the work of an evangelist, fulfill your ministry." Verse 6, "For I am already being poured out as a drink offering, and the time of my departure is at hand. I have fought a good fight, I have finished the race, and I have kept the faith. Finally, there is laid up for me a crown of righteousness, which the Lord, the righteous judge, will give to me on that day, and not to me only, but to all those who love his appearing." There are three groups in the church that he addresses. It's 66 AD. For 31 years, this man has been going to and fro throughout the universe that he could get to. He's made 3 complete rounds of missionary journeys. And this young man named Timothy has been with him almost on every portion of this. But now it's, as Cole had said last week, it's the conversation between Papa, the granddad, and the grandson as he leaves this world. So we're going to look at the first group, and that's an interesting group. I hope you fall in that. There are 2 things that he talks about. Verse 2, be ready. Verse 5, be watchful. Be ready, be watchful. Be ready, be watchful. This is the first group. I call them today. This is the day group. What should we be doing today? We should be ready to do everything that he's asked us to do, and we should be watchful for those things that we do not anticipate, the things we cannot see, because those are the things that knock us off high centers, not what we think we know and we're doing. And so he gives us this instruction for today believers. Are you a today believer? In other words, you're putting all your faith, all the eggs in one basket of trusting and believing in Jesus Christ. You have made a confession of your sins, and you have made a declaration of your faith, becoming a believer in him. That's a today believer. So when he says in chapter 3 the perilous times will come, perilous times produce perilous people. Today there are believers who are looking forward. If you notice in verse 2, preach the word, be ready in season, out of season, convince, rebuke, exhort with all long suffering and teaching. So let's look at today believers. All of the things that he said that we need to be doing as a today believer, looking forward. Now, and the thing about looking forward is next week I'll be speaking back at First Baptist Alma, celebrating their 150th anniversary. I mean, it's an honor to go there, but it's sort of not. I'm the only former pastor left alive, so they didn't have a lot of choice. You got to bring him back. But 150 years. But here's the thing: I don't do backwards very well. I have never been to a reunion of any kind. Family or my family could hold a reunion in a phone booth, so there's not many of us. But I don't do backwards very well. I don't say goodbye very well, and I don't do backwards. So I'm not really looking forward to, because what they want to talk about is all the things that were accomplished. But here's about the thing about looking backwards of all the things that's accomplished. We are to look forward, not looking backward about what's happened, good or bad, but to be looking forward. So when he says to us, looking forward, that's the believer who, number one, it says, will preach the word. Preach the word. You say, well, that's only talking to you pastors. No, he's talking, he is talking to Timothy, who is going to take his place, but he's talking to every one of us that the word should be alive in our heart. We are preaching the word everywhere we go. We're preaching it through our demonstrations of faith. We're preaching it through our family. We're teaching it to our students everywhere we go. So it says, be ready, in season, out of season. That means when it's convenient. That means when it's not. It's not talking about April, May, June, and July, or September. It's talking about whether it's convenient or not. So as those of us who are today believers, and we're looking forward, he said, I want you first to preach the word. I want you to be ready to preach. I want you to be ready to convince. Notice the word reprove. Preach the word. Be ready in season, out of season. Convince or reprove. Reprove means to expose false doctrine. To expose it. When you hear it, it should be exposed. And so he says, be ready to do that, because you may have to. As a believer of today, we've got to be ready. We have no idea. In the moment, in the twinkling of an eye, this whole thing could change, could it not? I mean, that's the whole thing. Now, it's been 2,023 years since the cross that Jesus spread-eagled himself for the world and placed himself there. That's a long, long time. And we're still living in the same age that this man, who for 31 years has been making these missionary journeys, but we still have to be ready. In season, out of season, got to be ready. So, daytime believers, today, look forward, be ready, preach the word, convince. The next word is rebuke. To rebuke means to find a way to correct. And this is where it's difficult in the modern church, because being offensive, or saying to someone, this needs to be corrected, is not necessarily a pulpit thing. It just needs to be in our lives. If you are so prideful that you cannot receive any instruction, or that you cannot receive any help from someone who says, maybe you should think about this, he is saying you got to be ready to do that. And that's uncomfortable, is it not? It's uncomfortable to say to someone else, I really think this is an area of our life we need to work with. Oh, yeah, well, who died and made you boss? That's our attitude. Oh, yeah, so what are you? Who am I? Be ready, instant, in season, out of season, when it's convenient, when it's not. A today believer is always looking forward, never, ever looking back. Paul made this very clear when he said, I die daily. When we die daily, we're not a physical death daily, but spiritually have to get up and die to your flesh every day. And then he said to the Philippians, he said, look, I don't look behind me. I look in front of me, because that's the direction of travel. It's very important that we keep our direction of travel in the right way, in the right time, in the right place. So if you're a yesterday believer, you're saying that, well, we always did this. There's nothing wrong with that, except if you're hung up there, you're not moving forward. If you're hung up with, well, we've never done that before, then again, you're not looking forward. You're looking in fear through what maybe has not worked before. And so the today believer is always looking forward. And when we look around at one another, we see each other, we see all types of personalities, all types of egos and alter egos, and we're all different. And we were not called to be all the same. I remember back when I did music, and the first time I said, you know what? We've moved past the choir stage where we all have to have a red robe. At first we had blue robes, and then that went for years and years and years. And then we upped it to red robes. And then one day I said, put the robes away. We're not going to use robes anymore. What? There was about 6 weeks that it was just not there. Now, here's the thing about men wearing robes anyway. I don't like to wear a dress, and I sure don't want to stand in front of y'all wearing a dress. So why did men care if they had it? Now, about a year after that, you couldn't have put that choir in a robe if you would have tried to force them. You couldn't have paid them to put a hot, big robe on in the middle of summertime. But they just thought that it was a part of of the worship. They found out that it wasn't. Looking forward, he says, you have to be able to be instant in season and out of season. And you know, there's another part to that. You got to be flexible. You got to be able to go in different ways that you were not planning on going. You have to do different things. You may get called up on the platform to sing a song that you've never actually sung in your entire life. You got to be ready. You got to be instant in season, out of season. You got to be ready to actually take the reins of the unknown. Are you a today believer? Moving forward, being willing to take that which you don't know. Pastor Benny mentioned the Hallelujah Fest. Yeah, I hope we do have 2,000 come through the doors and through the halls, but and I hope we can minister to them. But I guarantee you one thing. There'll be mess ups, and there'll be somebody mad. There'll be somebody get their car hit. There'll be somebody going to have a flat tire. There'll be somebody that's going to work for 5.5, 6 hours that one day and feel unsatisfied or unfulfilled because, you know, I just don't think I was recognized. All that's going to happen. It happens in everything that happens. There are instances of good and bad in everything that goes on. But I'm going to tell you, everything that we do through these 10 doors that are opening to the public is to bring glory to the Lord. Is to bring glory to the Father. Every part of our lives is to bring glory to God. In fact, part of the Westminster Catechism, the very first thing is that our role in life is to bring God glory and to enjoy Him our entire life. It's in the Catechism itself, to enjoy Him. And, you know, as believers, I watch a lot of things that we do, and I'm not really sure that we're enjoying the things that we said we are doing because we've been called to them. So listen, a today believer, he says, look, Timothy, I don't have any time left. This is it. So a today believer's got to look forward. And you got to be ready in season, out of season. You got to be ready to rebuke. And the last word, exhort. That's the word for encourage. Your words, and sometimes even when you have to give constructive criticism or what to someone else, it should always end with an encouragement. There should always be something about you that's encouraging someone else. I mean, you need to find an open door of encouragement. So that last thing he said, be ready now, because I want you to be able to encourage. So how do we encourage? How do we encourage? You can encourage with your mouth. You can encourage with a handshake, a smile, anything, a thumbs up. Some of you are just fist bump because you've got 2 donuts, 1 in each hand, and a cup of coffee. So I fist bump you. But to encourage, make sure that you encourage someone this day before you leave this place. You say, well, I want someone to come encourage me. The more that you put yourself in the encourager position, the more you will encourage others and you'll be encouraged yourself. I promise you that. The more that you hide from anyone else, the more difficult it is to be encouraged. It really is. If you walk through the doors and you sit down and you say, all right, bless me if you can. I double dog dare you. I ain't going to smile through this whole thing. You can't make me. I'm going to have an uphill job with you, but I'm going to take it on, you know. But to encourage simply means I've got to be ready for that because someone is going to need that in our life today. Well, that's the first group that is here in perilous times. The today believers, be ready. Verse 5, be watchful. You be watchful. In what? All things. Okay. I need you to do a good job on everything. I need you to be watchful in all things. That means have a conscience of your surroundings. Be very conscious of your surroundings. Who's coming up? Who's going by you? How can you jump on that wagon and be a help? Or how can you get off that wagon and be a help? I had a friend that went to a bus ministry conference in Memphis, Tennessee. He was the speaker. And this was a very, very large church and probably had 30, 40 buses going. Over 100 people worked in their bus ministry. That was back in the early 80s when everybody had a bus. And so anyway, he said to those guys and gals on this Saturday morning, he said, you know, if you don't enjoy the bus anymore, you need to quit. If it's not fulfilling, you need to quit. Well, the next morning, they had 32 workers out of 100. Come to find out, 3/4 of the people weren't happy in their work and what they were doing. They had lost the joy in bringing boys and girls to church. It's easy to do. It's easy to do. I've lost the joy standing here and open the Word before. I really have. So he says, I want you now to be ready, and then I want you to be watchful. To watch means to observe. To watch means finding a way that I can help. It's like what we watch children. If you've ever pulled nursery duty, anybody done nursery? You've all done nursery, right? That's hazardous duty pay right there. You know, so many different things happen in the nursery. In fact, I think a lot of property law, legal terms, comes from the nursery. In which if a kid looks at the other kid with the toy, if you're enjoying it, it's mine. If it's broken, it's yours. That's how we write property law. And you know, when you're in there doing nursery, Cole, have you ever done nursery? Okay. Sign him up and put him in the nursery for about 6 weeks. You notice there's one little boy or one little girl just sitting in the stroller over there and got that look on their face. And somebody's going to have to do something in about 3 minutes. You need to go through that. Be instant in season and out of season, my brother. Be ready. Be watchful. Watchful for everything that's going on around us. The nursery is important. Everything's important. You folks upstairs are important as you folks downstairs. You folks back going to this class, everything's important. Quilting lady's important. All of it's important, but you got to be watchful. And he says, I want you to be able to not only be watchful, but in all things, endure. 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 Endure afflictions. Physical pain. This is what he's talking about. Right now, everyone in this room is going through a battle that no one else knows about. I know that I'm right. In this room, there are people who are battling something that they don't feel they can tell anyone else. Not because it's evil or sinful or whatever. It's just a battle that they're going through. So for goodness sakes, this ought to be the one place you can come in the world where we're ready to encourage you to endure afflictions. You have to be able to endure afflictions. You got to be ready to. What are you ready to take on as a believer today? What are you ready? So, I'm not quite ready for this. I'm not quite ready for that. When are you going to get ready? When will you ever be ready? I mean, you say, well, I know we need this. I know we need that, but I'm not quite ready. You got to get yourself ready. You got to get yourself ready. Why? Because time is running out. Be ready. Be watchful. Endure all afflictions. And then he says, I want you to do the work of an evangelist. What is that? My family traveled with me for 3.5 years, traveled this country, 32 different states, wore out 3 one-ton trucks, 2 different 40-foot fifth-wheel trailers, bounced up and down the road until all of a sudden my children looked grown. My wife looked exhausted. We were in Bozeman, Montana, and First Baptist Church of Bozeman, Montana, and I walked into the trailer. I could tell her body was there, but she was just not there. Worn out physically, worn out spiritually. Made our family go home. I finished the next year by myself in a small Class C motorhome. Took me 1 year to do that. Had to be away from my family all that time. But what I'm saying about this thing about the ability to endure and the ability then to take on what he says in verse 5, fulfill the ministry, do the work of an evangelist. The work of the evangelist is not to travel all over the United States. The work of an evangelist is your buddy right next to you that you're fishing with, the gal sitting by you at the coffee shop, or the friend that you're working with. You do the work of an evangelist, which is what? Tell the good news. Tell the good news. Tell the good news. What is the good news? Jesus Christ died for us. He saved me. He can save you as well. You got to be ready. Got to be ready to do that. And then you got to be watchful for that opportunity. You got to be watchful for that opportunity. Now, that's the first group. The second group is tomorrow. verse 3 and verse 4. I call these the tomorrow guys. Verse 3, for the time will come when they will not endure sound doctrine. Now, this is not talking about a year or a time of the month. This is talking about inside these people's lives, there reaches a point in which they turn. And I call them tomorrow believers, looking to please self. So he says, there will come this time when they will not endure sound doctrine, but according to their own desires, because they have itching ears, they will heap up for themselves teachers. And they will turn their ears away from the truth and be turned aside to fables. Tomorrow, there's coming a time. Now, are we here yet? We're getting really, really close. Churches are being flooded with people who do not have the interests of the gospel at heart. They have their personal desires at heart. In other words, when he uses the word personal desires here, it's flesh. Thinking of self first. And not necessarily evil, not satanic. It's just me first. Putting me first. The entire Me Too thing that went around 3 to 5 years ago, Me Too, everybody jumped on all that. And I know there was bad things going on. I know that there's sexual promiscuity. I understand all that. Inappropriateness. And that all should be dealt with. But what he is talking about here is not necessarily that. It's just that it is a me first type of believer. They're coming tomorrow in which churches are going to be changed. The dynamic of the cross will not be as important and central and key as it is now. Because if you hear anything from the preachers who preach from this pulpit that does not climax with what Christ did and his finished work on the cross, and how that you can apply it to everyday life. If you're under the truck fixing a transmission, if you're out welding, if you're building a house, if you're cleaning the house, if you're at the store buying groceries, every part of what Christ has already done, the finished work, applies to you in every area of your life. Now, tomorrow, there is coming a church that will put flesh first, self first. Anytime that we say, I would be more comfortable, or it's better for me if we would do this. See, a tomorrow church is going to say, we're more concerned about your comforts than your soul. We're more concerned about your feelings than the scripture or the word. We do not want you hurt. We do not want you offended. I don't want to offend anybody. And if the word offends, though, that's between you and the Lord. If the way that I present it offends, then I owe you an apology. He didn't call us to be jerks and telling people what's wrong with their lives. I have more wrong with mine than you have with yours. But I am telling you, when he says that there is coming a tomorrow church when believers will look to please themselves. And he says, first, they won't endure sound doctrine. And secondly, their desires will rule. Their desires trump everything else. They'll have itching ears and turning ears. Now I wonder about, what is itching ears and turning ears? Do you ever have an itching ear? You know, where you do everything, you get a Q-tip done in there and all of that. It's not talking about a physical dimension of hearing. It's talking about seeking to hear those things which please me. That's what it means. Always those things which please me. Now, inside of this is the second part, and their ears turn. Once they're itched, they turn. Turn away from what? Truth. The more you hear of what pleases me, the less value the Word of God has. And it's more about how I feel. It's more about what I'm thinking. We start talking about books that have been written rather than the book which was given to us that transforms lives. The only thing we can make a difference in anybody else's life, and I don't care what their sin is the Word of God. There are only two things that secures us and ties us. That's the Word of God and our prayer. And the bigger the need, the greater the prayer. The bigger the need, the more you better pray. And he says here, there's coming a tomorrow church that's going to be this way. Itching ears, they're only going to want that which pleases me. Now listen, there's way too much in the Bible that does not please me. Because my will is supposed to yield to his will in everything. Your will must yield to him. For you're not your own, he said to the Corinthians. Corinthians were pretty much this way. We want to do what we want to do. We want to go where we want to go. We want to do it when we want to do it. So he said, listen, well, that's okay, I guess, but you need to be reminded of this, that you are bought with a price. You've been bought and paid for. The blood of Jesus Christ cleanses you. You've been bought. You've been paid for. We are a doulos, a bond servant, a slave of Jesus Christ. He said, we don't like the part of being the bond servant of the slave. We don't like that part. There's something about our modern thinking that says that we have all freedoms and all rights, and that is true. But folks, we're nothing more than servants, bond servants of Jesus Christ in this world. That's why don't elevate anybody too high and don't take them down too low. So the church of today, the church of tomorrow, he moves on to say, it's time to take inventory. Time to look at this. Are you part of the church of tomorrow? They will turn their ears away from the truth and be turned aside to fables. Wow. It's time to take inventory. Are your words reconciling or dividing? Encouraging or discouraging? Are they helpful or hurtful? Are they a blessing or are they a curse? Then there's the yesterday, verse 6, 7, and 8. There's the today believer looking forward. There's the tomorrow believer looking to please themselves. And then there's yesterday. Verse 6, I'm ready, being poured out as a drink offering, and the time of departure is at hand. And then he makes this beautiful statement, only says it once. I fought a good fight. I fought, and it was a good fight. I finished, and it was a good race. I have kept the faith. And finally, there's a crown laid up for me. So yesterday, believers are looking back. You can't help that. The older you get, the more you begin to think. And I promise you this, every believer, the moment they get older, whenever that moment comes, they start looking back. I've been thinking just recently, I'd like to go back to our old home place. Haven't been there many, many, many years. A little 1,200 square foot house, if it's still standing there. Never did have an air conditioner, still doesn't have one today. I'd just like to see that. I'd like to see that great big oak tree that I hid behind one day, so the state cop couldn't find me. I was a little bitty boy, and my mom was arrested, and I hid behind that oak tree. Well, about 20 years ago, I drove my little brother through there, and I looked at that tree, and it wasn't near as big as I thought that it was, but it hid me. And then I look at this tree that I hide behind, even to this day, the blessed cross. Folks, we've got to hide behind the cross because all of our goodness, all of our righteousness, all of this stuff is no good. It is only Jesus, only Jesus, only Jesus can save us, satisfy us, fill us, and make us who we are today. Wow. So, yesterday believer looks back. He says, I'm a drink offering. Now, in the day, the priest, he would offer the bullock or the lamb or the ram or the dove. And when it was over, he would take a cup of wine and he would pour it out. The Romans did it as well. When they were sacrificing to their gods, at the end of that sacrifice, they would take a very expensive cup of wine and they would pour it out as unto the gods. But I think Paul is thinking something else. I may be wrong. I think he's thinking something else. I think I see Paul, who's going back to the story of David. He's behind enemy lines. The Philistines have him cut off. And his men of valor, mighty men of valor were there. 3 of them were there. And they're sitting with the fire with old David. And David says, oh, guys, I'd give anything to have a drink of water out of that Bethlehem well. Those 3 men looked at one another. And they got on their horses. They went behind the Philistine enemy lines. They snuck all the way inside of Bethlehem, which had been northeast of where they were, maybe 10 miles. They got that pitcher of water. They snuck back through enemy lines. They come back across, and they present it to David. David looks at that. He said, what is it? He said, that's the water from the well. You know what he did with it? You remember that story? He poured it out on the ground as holy unto the Lord. He said, I'm not worthy to drink this. I think that's what Paul is looking at. And so I'm a drink offering ready to be offered up. So he's looking, and he can't help it. He's kind of looking back to yesterday. I have fought a good fight. I have finished the course. I have kept my faith. And finally, there's laid up for me a crown of righteousness. Only time in the Bible it says that, a crown of righteousness. Only time it's ever mentioned. And so when he says, the time of my departure is at hand. It's a Greek word, analysos. Analysos. Here's what he meant. Time of my departure is at hand. When the captain of a ship in those days would say, he would look around and say, well, we're ready to go. He would say to his crew leader, Analysos. The crew leader would holler down to the men, Analysos. What's it mean? Undo the rope off the mooring. Pull the anchor up. It's time to leave. Wow. It's time to leave. Paul said, Analysos, I'm pulling the anchor up, letting the rope, I'm heading out. And in just a few days or months, he indeed did. The time of my departure is at hand. Folks, you don't know when yours is. I don't know when mine is. I have no idea. I firmly believe that when I address that sweet church where I pastored, we served for 30 years, when I address them, I will never address them again after next week. But I do not know the time of my departure. I just don't think I'll be able to get back down there. I got a group of people here that need word. Do they ever need the word? Y'all are like herding cats. Time of my departure is at hand. I can't say that, and you can't either. But there's a yesterday believer in every one of us who have walked a long way, who've gone a long way. And so he says about this, the time of my departure is at hand. Finally, there's laid up for me a crown of righteousness, which the Lord, the judge, will give me at that day. Not to me only, but all those that love his appearing. So there are three groups of people. There is the today believers, there is the tomorrow believers, and there's yesterday believers. He uses this beautiful word about departing and leaving. And, he's talking about physical death. But all of you have heard of a marathon, right? Anybody ever run a marathon besides Missy? You run a marathon, 26.2 miles? You just lying? She's kidding. Okay. The word marathon comes from this story. Philippides was a runner for a Greek general. And they had defeated the Persian army in a place called Marathon. And he sent to the runner, and they said, bring me a runner. Philippides goes to him and he says, get word in Athens that we have defeated the Persians. So this runner takes off. And he goes around the coastline. He goes up, and he wasn't on horseback because he had to hide. And he finally made his way into Athens, and he comes down the street singing, rejoice, we won. He did that 3 times and fell over dead. 26.2 miles. Today, the modern Olympic Games honor the marathon runner with 26.2 miles. He fell over dead saying, rejoice, we win. Now let me tell you something. There will come a day for you when you can say, rejoice, brother, sister, we won. We won. We won. That's why it's important that we meet together every week. Because there are some today believers that we want to keep focused. There are some tomorrow believers coming, and they're going to need help. And there's yesterday believers who are barely hanging on today because they recognize that the time of their departure is at hand. Now I ask you this day, are you sure? Are you knowing for sure that you have made a confession of your sin and a declaration of your faith for Jesus Christ to be your Lord? I ask every one of you as believers, which one of these groups are you? Are you in that looking forward, not paying any attention to what didn't work yesterday, or whose feelings were objected yesterday, or what we did wrong yesterday, or what we did right yesterday? It doesn't matter because it's yesterday. Apologize, love one another, and move forward. Is there someone that you haven't forgiven? Because it's vitally important that we live in forgiveness. It's vitally important that we use words like, I'm sorry. Like, can you forgive me? This was my fault. You'll see doors open that you thought were closed forever when you use those words. Thank you. I'm sorry. My fault. I ask you as a believer today to get ready, to get focused for what's tomorrow in your life. Let's stand together.